So when you open up After Effects, typically this window will come up and you can just kind of find recent projects right here and click right there if you have a recent project that you would like to open. Additionally, you can click on this button right here and start from scratch with a new project. And clicking this new project button and then just closing this out is kind of the same thing. If I just close out this whole window right here, I've got a new project right here. So this is what After Effects looks like right here. And right now I'm in the default arrangement. You can see right here when I click these buttons, the arrangement of the interface changes when I click on each one. And you can even go over to these double arrows and find ones that you make yourself custom, which I'll go over later in this tutorial here if you want to create your own custom layout. But to start out, and most of the time when I'm teaching this class, especially early on, I'm going to stick with the default view. So hopefully that way y'all aren't searching around for panels, when I'm trying to show a technique or something like that. So this is the default arrangement right here, and I can just get to it by clicking on that button. And there are basically technically five major panels happening here. So we have our project panel right here. We have our composition panel right here. We have a panel that contains on the right a bunch of smaller panels in there. And then finally we have the timeline panel down here. And additionally, we have the toolbar up here, which is kind of like the toolbar, if you're familiar with Photoshop, that usually appears on Photoshop on the left side. So to start things out, let's start with the top left and kind of move from there in explaining this. So the project panel is where you have all your assets that you need for your scene here. And if you remember in my last tutorial, I had, let me move that out of the way. I had made a folder structure in my Finder window that works with my project. So I've called my After Effects project Intro to AE because that's going to be the name of this demo here today. And when I click on it, you can see here that I have a folder for After Effects projects. I have a folder for audio, images, so any images that I want to bring into After Effects here, for instance, and then a folder for video assets. And so let's just say here that I want to make an After Effects project and I want to use this JPEG, or I guess this is a PNG of a Rick and Morty turnaround. This is just basically a random image here. So I have my project folder right here, and if I wanted to use that in my After Effects project, I would just drag it into here. And the reason I'm doing that, if you recall, is because After Effects, an After Effects project, when you save, is a tiny file. It's just a few kilobytes, and it's referencing all these assets from around your computer. And so you want to keep those assets in the same spot on your computer, or else After Effects will have to be looking for them and it'll cause a lot of problems for you, right? So that's just kind of a review of what we went over on the last video lesson. So looking at this right now, it's empty. And what I like to do before I start out is I like to make a few folders in here just to keep things organized. I think a big mistake that many students make when working in After Effects, and honestly any software, is just failing to have a system to stay organized, and it can cause so many problems. And if you can get in the habit of doing it early, it's going to make your life a lot easier here. And so what I'm doing here is in the project folder, I'm just clicking on this button right here, which is called Create a New Folder, and I'm just naming it, and I'll just press trash to get rid of those to kind of make sure I go over this clearly for you all. So I'll click on this, and this will make a new folder. It's just an empty folder where I can keep things organized. I'm going to name one comps. I'm going to click outside of it. Then I'm going to click the folder again, call it audio, click outside of it, click again, images, and just clicking on the folder again. And I'll make one called video. So One thing a lot of people do that's a big mistake is they'll just start dragging their assets into their project window here, and there will be no rhyme or reason to the way they're organized, and they're going to spend a ton of time searching through and trying to find things. And so what you want to do is you want to set up a few folders here. So any audio files that I bring in, I can just drag it into my audio folder. Comps is something I'm going to explain here in a moment. Images, so if I want to import, for instance, that Rick and Morty image file, I can bring it in there. And additionally, any video assets, I would drag it into here. And so that way, when I'm working on my project later and I want to find one of my assets, I know which folder to go into, and life's going to be a lot easier for me. So let's say I want to import that Rick and Morty asset. So I'll just click on images right here. And I could just find it and then just drag it on, and that would work. But what I like to do is I just like to go up to the top and go to File, Import, and then Import File. So File, Import, Import File. And this window will open up. It's going back to an older project right there. So I'm on my desktop. That's where my project folder is. So I have Intro to AE. Then images, and then here's the screenshot. It's a PNG file, and there it is right there. And so this folder right here, or sorry, this panel right here is where you keep your project organized. And there's more that I'll kind of go over with this. There's a lot of helpful things you can do here, but that's the essential function of it, is to bring your assets in and keep things organized for your project here. Generally speaking, we have these icons down here, so you can create a new folder. You can create a new composition, which I'm about to explain here in a moment. And then if you want to delete an asset, you can just select it and then click on this trash can right here, and that'll delete it. So if I want to get rid of that Rick and Morty asset that I just brought in, I would just select it and then press the trash can, and then it would go away. If I want to undo that, I can go up to Edit and then Undo Delete Items. Or as you can see here, the shortcut shows I can press Command and Z on my keyboard, and it'll bring it back right there. This is kind of so again, I'm just kind of going over this roughly here. So this is the project window. This is where you keep your assets. Moving over here, we have our composition window. And so a composition in After Effects, you can have multiple compositions in a scene. And this is where you have a scene, basically. So you can see here I made a composition folder right there that's empty. You can click on the shortcut right here to create a new composition. But what I like to do is I like to go up to the top here. If you look at your top window, it should have composition, and then click on new composition right there. You can see there's a shortcut for it right there as well. And why I like to do it this way is this window comes up and it lets you specify exactly what you want to, what aspect ratio and all that stuff that you want for your project. And within this class, what I would like you all to do for virtually every project is to use a certain preset. So HD TV 1080 2997 right there. And I'd like you to start there. So that's 1920 by 1080. This is the default HD project that you would see on TV or on YouTube or anything like that. So this is a really safe setting right here. And you don't really need to change too much on this, but let me just go from top to bottom explaining this. Whenever you're creating a new composition, you can name it right here. So I'll just call this Comp 1, for instance. And when I save it, it'll eventually show up right here in my project folder, and it'll show up as Comp 1 right there because I named it that. We have the preset, which is HD TV. I have it at 1080, which is 1920 by 1080, which is the standard format. Square pixels is always what you're going to want to use. You can see right here the number 29.97 is right here, and that's the frame rate. And so for most television right now, 29.97 is the correct frame rate, which is essentially 30 frames per second, but this is kind of what's used is 29.97. For a lot of animation and a lot of film, like what you would see if you go to the theater, will be at either 24 frames per second or 23.976. So this is kind of the choice that you have right here, I would say, when you're setting up your compositions, is you can either work in 2997 or 24, and that's kind of your choice. 2997 will have more fluid motion and it'll have more of a commercial look, and then 24 frames per second will typically have a little bit more of like a theatrical cinematic look. So that's really up to you what you want to do there. Resolution, we want full. And then right here is just how long do we want our project to be. And right now, I'll just type this in. This is 10 seconds right here. So this is 10 seconds. This is kind of the frames between seconds. And then when we get into here, this is minutes. So I'm going to keep this really short. So I'm going to have a 10-second duration right here. And so if you want it to be 10 seconds, you type it in this way right here. Going down further, we have the background color. So right now the background color would be like a reddish off black right here. So if you want to change that or a dark red, you can see right there, it kind of says it for you. So if you want to change your background color, you can click on there. This window will come up. And if you're this should be familiar for you if you've used Photoshop. But if you haven't used Photoshop before, the way this works is if you drag it up here, you can see we have this little cursor here. So if you drag it up here, it'll be white. If you drag it down to the bottom left corner, it'll be black. If you drag it up here, it'll be a completely saturated red. And then you can see as I'm dragging it down, it's becoming a darker and darker saturated red as I bring it down. And then it kind of becomes black again once I bring it down to that corner. And then if you want a pastel, you can kind of look in this range where we're mixing between white and red right here. So you can create a pastel by clicking in there. And then we have the slider to the right where you can choose different hues. So let me make it totally saturated so you can see it's red. It's going through the rainbow here, yellow, green, blue, purple, and then red, kind of going back to where it started again. So you can have this be any color you want. I might go with a gray right here. If you want it to be a complete gray, you can just type 50 right here on this number right there. And this is like a gray that's a complete average between white and black right there. Any color is fine. So these are the steps you kind of go through when choosing a new composition. So just to recap, all I really did is I went down here. I chose, you can choose this preset right here or this preset right here for where you want to start. And the only difference between those two is the frame rate. You can see we have 24 frames per second or we have 29.97. All these other ones can be useful for certain things, but most of the time, professionally and in this class, you're, at least at this point in time, these two are kind of the most useful. You have frame rate, you can change right there. I would choose 24 or 29.97. And then duration, you can set the duration of your composition. And then finally, you can set the background color of your composition. And once that's all done, you press OK. And so now you can see I had comps selected right here. So my composition falls neatly within my comps folder right there. So I have an empty composition right there. You can see now this composition folder now has that gray color that I chose, right? And so that's kind of like the background color. And we can see now too that comp 1, that composition, showed up in my timeline right here. So now my timeline has something going on in it too. It's empty at the moment, but there's at least something there. And if you recall, I set the duration to be 10 seconds long. So you can see we have 2 seconds right here. We have 5 seconds right here, 7, and then the end is 10 right there. So this is our timeline right there. And looking through this right now, we have, if you're wondering what this bar right here is, this sets the duration of the render once you render this out. So if you make an animation that's 10 seconds long, or sorry, you have a composition that's 10 seconds long, but you have an animation that's, let's say, 2 seconds long right there, and you're ready to export it, you just drag this down. And if you hold shift, a lot of times it'll snap, but you can also just drag it by hand. And so you can have your render be 2 seconds long right there if you want. We'll go over that more later. So basic navigation of this timeline right here. is once we create new assets, they'll show up right here. And the way that it works in After Effects is anything that's on top will show up on top of something else. And I'll demonstrate that here momentarily. If you want to zoom in on your timeline right here, so let's say that we have 10 seconds and I really want to get in the nitty gritty of the 2-second mark. We have this slider right here and you can see the small mountains and the big mountains right there. You can either click on the big mountain to zoom in, or you can just drag this cursor right here to keep zooming in, and it's going to zoom in wherever your cursor is. And additionally, I can zoom out just by dragging it to the left right there towards the small mountain. So you can either kind of drag the cursor, or you can just tap the mountain and it'll zoom in wherever you happen to have your cursor right there. So that's kind of how you navigate that aspect right there. So let's say I'm ready to start animating and I want to bring that Rick and Morty image in and start animating with it. So it's under my images folder up here. I'll just click on it and then drag it down. So I'm just clicking on it and then just holding down, normal click, and then dragging it into this window right here. And you can see a little plus sign shows up to show that this is a good spot to drag it. And I guess you can also drag it down here. Just by habit, I drag it here. And I let go. And you can see that asset shows up right there. And we'll go over this in future videos here, but there's a litany of things I can kind of bring into my timeline or composition. There's different ways I can animate this as well. So we'll go over that in more detail later on, but there's a lot we can do with this here. And so looking at this timeline, you can see right here that there's this little arrow right here that's next to my layer, so it's right to the left of it. And if I drag that down, you can see that there's a lot of different ways that I can mess with it. So I can rotate the asset and I'm just clicking on the number right here and dragging from right to left to rotate it. Additionally, I can just type in numbers. So if I want to rotate it by 15 degrees clockwise, I'll do plus 15. If I want to rotate it, let's say 15 degrees counterclockwise, all I need to do is type negative 15 right there and then press return and it'll go there. We'll go way more into detail on animation, but this is kind of where you find some of your basic kind of transformation commands right there. Looking at this, again, we'll go over this in more detail, but this is the visibility icon right here. So if I want to turn the visibility of a layer on and off, I can click on it right there. Since this is just an image file, there's no sound to it. So that box is empty. So there's nothing we can do with it. But if you have like a video that you want to import in and it's got sound, you can turn on and off the sound by clicking on a check mark right there. Right here is, this is soloing a layer, which can be really helpful if you have a really big project and you have 1,000 layers going on and you want to just look at one layer. So that helps you solo it. And right here is where you lock a layer. And so that just keeps you from, if you don't want it to move and you want it to be kind of, you've animated it or you just don't want it to move anymore from what you've already set, you can just lock it to make sure it doesn't get messed up or something like that. And we'll go over all of these buttons here in more detail, but again, I'm trying to just kind of give a rough overview of the way things work right here. So looking up here, let's now look in our composition view. You can zoom in and out of this comp right here. So right now it's set at 100%, and that's kind of the magnification. And that's this tab right here. If I want to zoom way out to 12.5%, I can do it right there. Or I can zoom way in, let's say 400%. And you can see right here, I zoomed in 400%. And if you want to zoom back out, you can go back to 100%. Or one thing I like to do is just go up to the top where it says fit. And something that's nice about fit is it just fits the edge of your composition in here, and no matter how big or small your window gets, you can see your full HD project right there. So going up to fit is really helpful if you've been zooming in and out of your scene here. As you can see here, I didn't go over this before, but you can click on the edges here and you can make, for instance, your project folder bigger or smaller. You just have to wait for your cursor to have that double arrow show up right there. And then you just click and drag, and so you can kind of make things bigger or smaller right here, just by clicking that and moving it around. So another way you can zoom in is I'm doing my mouse wheel right now. It says you can use your mouse wheel and zoom in that way as well. And if you press spacebar, you can get this little hand right here. And that helps me just move my view to these different zoomed in areas. So if you've zoomed in and it kind of zoomed in on like a character's arm or something, and what you wanted to zoom in was on their eye, you just hold spacebar, this little hand will come up, and you can kind of find the eye or whatever specific detail that you want to find right there. And then if you want to zoom out, you can either mouse wheel out again, just doing a mouse wheel out, or if you're zoomed in and you want to zoom out, is you can just click on this tab right here and go up to fit, and then you can find your full composition right here. Looking at these, there's we're going to go over these icons in more detail later on. I'm just again trying to give a broad overview of things. This is just the resolution right now. It's set at full, and the only reason you would want to set this at quarter, you can see I have it set at quarter right now and the resolution went way down, is if your computer's just having trouble handling a scene, if a scene's a little too complicated. This will kind of help ease things on your computer while you're working. So typically if your computer can handle it, just leave it at full right there. Okay, so moving on, we have this window on the right over here, and you can see we have info, and I'm just expanding it by clicking on the word. So right here I have info, I have audio, I have preview, which is the main one I want to kind of go over here right now. And then we have effects. There's just some really helpful kind of things here, and it just depends on what you're hoping to do here. So for instance, if you're trying to do, if you want to preview your animation, this thing's not animating right now, it's just a still image right now, but I can press spacebar and you can see if there were animation happening right now, it's playing it back. So spacebar is a good shortcut to just play back whatever you have. You can tell that you can preview something, by the way. If this green bar is showing up, that means it's ready to preview right there. But additionally, in this top bar up here, and you can customize this area up here a whole lot, but the preview tab's a really important one. And you can see when I'm previewing, it kind of comes up, and you can kind of set some settings here to how it previews here. So you can see here my shortcut is set at spacebar. You can change the shortcut if you don't like spacebar being the shortcut to preview something. You can change it up here. We have play, we have return back to the first frame right there. This button right here will go to the last frame. This one, it'll kind of go to the previous frame right here, so you can kind of, if you want to just kind of toggle frames right here, let's just say you're at 9 seconds right here, and you want to go to 9 seconds and 1 frame, just click on next frame right there, and it'll kind of jump ahead 1 frame right there. So you can see one thing that After Effects is really helpful with is it'll show you, if you hover your cursor over something and you're not sure what it is, you just see what it is right there. And right here we can turn on and off like the sound, for instance. Most of the time the defaults right here is going to be what you want to keep right here. So typically I don't really mess with this too much. The work area refers to the area where this gray bar is with the blue handles at the end of it right here. That's the work area. And so I typically don't mess with that too much. I like to play from the current time, meaning that if I had an animation right now and I was at 9 seconds, when I press play, it would start at 9 seconds right there, and then it would go back to the beginning and come back to it. But you can set it to start at start of range. And so now, even though my cursor's at 9 seconds, if that's at start of range, the preview is going to start back here. So you can see it starts back at 0 frames if it's set right there. So you have those two options right there between starting at the beginning of your composition or starting where your cursor is currently located. Frame rate, you want this to be whatever frame rate your composition is. I never mess with that. The resolution is, right now, the preview is set at quarter. And what that does is, if you're working on a complicated animation, it just makes it so that the preview will load really quickly. And this is really helpful if your computer is just maybe not the most powerful. But if you have a really powerful computer and your composition is not too complicated, you can have your previews be at full resolution right there. And that's kind of the main things with that preview right there. And so additionally, you can find other things in this area, and it just kind of depends on what kind of thing you want to do in After Effects, because After Effects, you can use it for like motion design, for instance. And so there you might be dealing with like typography a whole lot. And so, for instance, the character window is really helpful for that. If you're doing visual effects, the tracker window can be really helpful because you might be motion tracking some animation into a live action scene. So this can get pretty complicated. And we'll kind of dive into each of these panels later on here. So continuing to kind of go through this, this is kind of the last panel that I want to go over here in this tutorial. And this is the toolbar right here. So just kind of going from left to right, I'm just going to touch on the really kind of the most important ones right here. So the main one is the selection tool. Shortcut for it is V. And so that just makes it so if you click on something, it selects. Oops. So if I'm looking in my composition, I can just click right there, and you can see that my image got selected immediately. And you can also tell what got highlighted, because if you can see here, it also highlights down here in the timeline when I click on it there. And when the selection tool's selected, I can just move an item around and change its location. We'll get into how to animate it later on, because right now I'm moving it, but if I play, it just stays right there at at its current location, no matter where I drag it. And so we'll go over how to animate things here soon, but again, we're just going over the basic interface and the basic tools. So that's the selection tool. This is the home tool. This is that initial window we saw when we opened things up, right? If you want to kind of go back and find an old project or something like that, you can press the home button. The hand tool is the same as the shortcut for the space bar, and I think H is also the shortcut for it as well, so you can either press H or the space bar to get this. And when I say space bar, you're kind of holding it down rather than clicking it. If I click space bar, it plays a preview. But if you click and hold down spacebar, the hand tool will work. It might be a better habit. That might be a bad habit on my part. So the H is another shortcut to get this. And this is just a way for if you want to zoom in and kind of see your composition differently, see a detail, something like that. And if you want to get back out of it, you can just press this tab over here and then find fit right there. And then it'll fit back to your original scene. We have zoom in, zoom out, shortcut Z right here. So you can do your mouse wheel, or you can press Z, or press this button right here. There's a bunch of different ways you can zoom in. And so here I'm just clicking, and wherever I click is where it's going to zoom in, right? So if I want to click in on his eye, I just keep clicking, and now it's at 1600%. That's kind of max resolution right there. And that is how you zoom in. You can see if you look at my cursor up here, there's a little plus on the zoom. And if I press Option on my keyboard, which is 2 to the left of your space bar, a minus will come up. And so now if I click, it'll keep kind of minusing out. So you can zoom in and out using this. And so by default it's zooming in, and you can tell because there's a little plus on it, right? And it'll zoom wherever you want it to go. Shortcut Z. Shortcut to zoom out of it is just, while this thing's active, you can press Option, and then you'll get a little minus right there, and so you can zoom out. And then you can also click down here and go to fit it back to screen right there. These will help you with later on. We'll go over these later on. This is how to move a 3D camera in After Effects. And I'll go over all these in more detail later on here, but there's just different tools we can use here. For instance, I can rotate an object right here. So I can just click and rotate an object using this cursor right here. This is a really helpful one, shortcut Y. I'm going to go over this in detail later on, but these are just your main tools are up here. Again, you can create type right here, so shortcut T, and you can type in some text right here using this tool right here. You can click on it, or again, you can just press T and it'll work for you. And if you want to kind of change the font and things like that, you can find that back in this window under character over here. And we're going to go over that in much more detail later on. So you can see right here that I typed in hello using that, and a new layer showed up here because this is a new asset, right, that showed up in my scene. And so right now in my timeline, I have my original image, and then I have my type layer right there. And so each asset that you kind of add into your project keeps creating new layers right here. And if you notice here, hello, I'm going to change the color of hello real quick, and I'll kind of go over all that in more detail later on here, how to do that. But what I want to show here is you see how this layer is on top of the Rick and Morty shot in my timeline, and you can see right there it's showing over top of it right there. If I change the order of these in my timeline, and you can just do that by click, hold, and then drag it down right there, you can see now the Rick and Morty shot's on top of the text right there. So the main way that this timeline works is whatever's on top is going to show up, whatever is on bottom is going to show beneath it right there in the timeline view. And when you create type, it actually doesn't show up in any of these folders up here. It's just kind of its own asset because it was created in After Effects, so it doesn't really need to exist in your project folder. So when you type in text right here, it's not going to show up over here, and you'll only be able to find it either in your composition view right here or down here in your timeline right there.